Hey everyone, I'm HarvestBuildDestroy, and in this video I'm going to talk about Rusted Warfare, a neat little indie RTS from a developer called Corroding Games that came out in 2017. Rusted Warfare is essentially a simplified Supreme Commander or Total Annihilation clone, but a well done one at that. And with its bargain bin price tag, it's an easy game to recommend as long as you know what you're getting yourself into. If, like myself, you think Supreme Commander and Total Annihilation have some interesting ideas, but the combination of their learning curves and tiny player bases has always kept you from getting properly into them, you might find that Rusted Warfare is a suitable entry point into this subgenre of RTS. However, if you're already experienced with TA or SupCom, you might just find it to be overly simplistic. But let's start with the basics of how it works. There's no commander unit in Rusted Warfare. Instead, you spawn with a command building which is fairly beefy and has an attack. There's no energy resource in Rusted Warfare either, and while having only one resource obviously simplifies the game quite a bit, I think it works quite well for what is so clearly a low-budget production. These two differences also give the game a little bit of a Supreme Commander meets Command & Conquer vibe, albeit in superficial ways. In addition to the single resource and absence of a commander, the minimap and resource counter are in the top right corner of the screen, and the unit and building production tabs are below, kinda like the classic CNC sidebar. Plus there's a mammoth tank. Anyway, like in Supreme Commander, your primary method of acquiring the main resource is to build extractors over the resource nodes scattered around the map, each of which increases your rate of income. In addition, your command building gives you a fairly large base income rate, and you can build additional resource buildings called fabricators anywhere you like. To balance them out, fabricators are more expensive than extractors and give you 1/4 the rate of income. Both extractors and fabricators can be upgraded to increase their income rates, but doing so is expensive and takes time, on top of the fact that the buildings are also quite fragile. When you spend your credits on units or buildings, you pay for them in a lump sum like you would in most RTS games, rather than increasing your resource drain rate like in Total Annihilation or Supreme Commander. The tech tree is incredibly simple, but also quite large. There are no passive upgrades, there's only one faction, and you can build any building you want right away. There are 4 basic types of factories: land, air, sea, and mech, all of which contain a large number of units, and even more once you upgrade them. Each factory must be upgraded individually, although higher tier builder units can build some pre-upgraded buildings. Aside from this, the things that would normally be thought of as higher or lower tech are differentiated only by their cost. You can hypothetically build a nuke launcher or anti-nuke defense building right at the start of the game, but you won't be able to afford them until you have a decent number of upgraded extractors and/or fabricators. The same goes for the experimental factory, which you can use to build expensive super units. The experimental units and some of the larger mechs take a while to get to, but they're pretty fun to use once you do. There's also a laser shield building which intercepts incoming enemy projectiles, kind of like the anti-missile system in MechWarrior, and a repair bay that heals nearby units like a Protoss shield battery in StarCraft. There are also, of course, both anti-land and anti-air static defense turrets, each of which has at least 2 separate upgrade paths that qualitatively change what they're effective against. As you can see from the footage, the game's graphics have a fairly endearing 16-bit meets Flash animation sort of vibe to them, and the game's soundtrack is excellent. The interface is reasonably modern too. You can zoom out as far as you want with the scroll wheel, just like in Supreme Commander, and you have hotkeys to cycle through your various buildings and builder units like in Age of Empires. Your hotkeys are also fully customizable in the options. Realistically, I'm not going to play this game enough to warrant redesigning them, but it's great to know that you can. I mentioned before that Rusted Warfare is obviously a low-budget game, and, well, this seems fairly apparent to me. For the most part, it runs pretty well, but units will often bug out and not move properly when you try and run them away as they're being attacked. It's a right-click to move RTS like any other developed this century, but for some reason, if you hold down right-click and move the mouse, it scrolls around the map, kind of like in old CNC games. This made a bit more sense in CNC with the old-school left-click to move interface, but with a modern right-click to move interface, it's just annoying because it's really easy to do by accident. The game modes are lacking polish too, which is admittedly understandable for a smaller developer like this. I get it, RTS games are difficult and expensive to make, with dismal prospects for a return on your investment. I think they've done a pretty good job here with what was obviously a very difficult task, to design an RTS with what I can only assume was a very small team with limited resources. The game is both functional and fun to play, so I think they've ultimately succeeded. With that said, the game's multiplayer is pretty primitive. There's no matchmaking, and I don't see anything indicating that there's a ranking system of any kind. There's quite a bit of single-player content, but there is quite literally no story whatsoever, and the objective is always the same. You start with some combination of stuff, and you have to kill all the other stuff on the map. The closest thing you have to a campaign is simply called missions. You have to play them in order, and your mission briefing is just a 1 or 2 sentence text box explaining what to expect from the scenario. No characters, no dialogue, just kill all the shit on the map and you unlock the next one. For skirmish, you have a fairly sizable selection of maps for up to 10 players, same as in multiplayer. Next, you have 7 challenge missions, and the only distinction between them and the missions mode is that you can play them in any order. You start with a more unorthodox combination of units and buildings, and they're designed to be significantly more challenging. There's also Endless Survival Mode, which is exactly what it sounds like. You choose one of 3 maps, and endless waves of units come at you until you die. There is also, oddly enough, a scenario editor, which is much more suitably called the Sandbox Editor since it doesn't appear to be a true scenario editor where you can build a map from scratch. As far as I can tell, you can't actually alter the terrain of the maps at all. Instead, you pick one of the pre-existing maps, and you can load whatever units and buildings and so on you want into it and save it as a sort of custom mission. It all takes place in real time though, so I guess it's a bit more like a Garry's Mod or Minecraft sort of thing in that respect. If you want to do some tests with some of the gigantic expensive units that take ages to get to in a normal skirmish game, the Sandbox Editor is the place to do it. That's pretty much all there is to Rusted Warfare though. It's fun, and despite not having a tutorial, easy enough to figure out fairly quickly on your own, the latter of which could hardly be said of the games it so heavily draws inspiration from. And yet despite that, it seems like there's a decent amount of depth to it for such a bite-sized game. I haven't played any multiplayer myself, but I think I might if I knew someone else who had the game. I watched some multiplayer matches on YouTube, and I got the impression that the game scales to quite a large degree. It seems like you can get to some pretty epic super late game scenarios if the game goes long enough, especially if you check the box that doubles the income rates of your resource buildings. I imagine you would generally want to play with that box checked in multiplayer, as it takes a fair bit of time to get going otherwise. It looks like it would be more fun if you could mass some of the bigger units earlier on and go for nukes and all that. But the game ultimately leaves me with a similar feeling to the one that Tooth and Tail left me with. It's not entirely clear to me who Rusted Warfare is supposed to be appealing to, and in the end it comes across as more like an appetizer game. A fun little game that's easy to pick up and play, but before long you might find yourself wanting to go play one of its more fleshed out big brothers. Still, it's so cheap on Steam that if you find the concept even remotely appealing, you're unlikely to regret picking it up. And being so cheap, you might as well buy more than one copy and gift it to your friends so you have people to play with. So go check it out. Anyway, that's just about all I have to say about Rusted Warfare, but I'm also planning to upload some live gameplay with commentary on the channel soon, so stay tuned for that if you want to see the game in action in real time. In fact, I'm planning to do that for every game I review moving forward. The YouTube algorithm gods tend to smile on those who upload at least once per week, and realistically, getting a proper scripted video out every week without fail is probably more than I can do without the quality slipping. That's all for this one though. As always, thanks for watching, and remember to rate, comment, subscribe, share, hit the bell, and all that. Any and all support is always greatly appreciated. See you soon.